At my grandfather's memorial service, my sister demanded the entire inheritance because she's the eldest. I laughed and said, check the will again. When she read the last line, her face turned pale as she screamed, this can't be happening. I don't know why I was surprised. Maybe some part of me still held on to the ridiculous hope that, after everything, Camille would act like a decent human being. That maybe, just maybe, our grandfather's death would be enough to make her put aside her selfishness, at least for one goddamn day. But I should have known better. Because the second she walked into the memorial service, dressed like she was attending a movie premiere rather than a funeral, I knew exactly how this was going to go. Joel, she drawled, lowering her designer sunglasses and giving me a once-over. God, you look rough. When's the last time you got a decent haircut? I clenched my jaw and forced myself to take a breath. Nice to see you too, Camille. She made a little dismissive wave with her hand before strutting past me, her heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floor. She didn't stop to greet any of the other mourners. Didn't so much as glance at the framed pictures of Grandpa Henry that lined the room. Nope. Her first stop was the lawyer. I watched as she latched onto his arm, flashing him a bright, calculated smile. Mr. Alden, she purred. I assume you have everything in order? I know Grandpa would have wanted me to handle things personally. Personally. Like she had given a single crap about Grandpa while he was alive. Mr. Alden gave her a polite but firm nod, gently detaching himself from her grip. We'll discuss the will after the service, Miss Beaumont. Camille huffed, clearly displeased, but before she could argue, our mother swooped in. There's my beautiful girl, Mom cooed, pulling Camille into a hug. I was beginning to worry you wouldn't make it. Camille scoffed. Of course I had to come. It's not like some people, she shot me a pointed look, can be trusted to make the right decisions. I stared at her, equal parts baffled and pissed off. What the HLL are you talking about? She smirked. Oh, nothing. Just that, as the eldest, I'll obviously be handling all of Grandpa's affairs. He would have wanted it that way. I let out a dry laugh. You? Handling things. She raised an eyebrow. Who else would do it? I shook my head, biting back 100 different responses. There was no point in arguing. Not yet. Because in a few hours, she was going to get the shock of her life. The funeral itself was, well, as good as a funeral can be. Grandpa had a lot of people who loved him, and the service was packed with old friends, former business partners, and family members I hadn't seen in years. Camille, of course, spent the entire time dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief and sighing dramatically, like she was the grieving widow of a lost king. It was disgusting. And the worst part? People bought it. Oh, Camille, your grandfather was so proud of you. One of our distant relatives gushed. He always talked about what a brilliant woman you've become, another chimed in. I wanted to laugh. Brilliant? The same Camille who had burned through 3 failed businesses, maxed out multiple credit cards, and only ever called Grandpa when she needed money? That Camille? But I kept my mouth shut. Because soon, very soon, she was going to get exactly what she deserved. After the service, we all gathered at Uncle Ray's house for the reading of the will. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone knew Camille was going to demand everything. And sure enough, the moment we all sat down, she leaned forward, her fingers tapping impatiently against the table. Well, she said, let's get this over with. Mr. Alden cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. As you all know, Henry Beaumont was a man of great integrity and fairness. His final will reflects those values. Camille didn't even pretend to listen. She just nodded along, already preening like she'd won the damn lottery. The lawyer began reading. A portion of Grandpa's savings went to charity. Some sentimental items were left to old friends. Small inheritances were given to various relatives. And then, the remainder of my estate, including all assets, property, and wealth, will be left to my grandson, Joel Beaumont. Silence. Complete, deafening silence. I felt Camille's entire body stiffen beside me. Then what? Her voice sliced through the room like a cayenne fay. She lurched forward, grabbing at the papers in Mr. Alden's hands. No, that's not right. That can't be right. Her eyes frantically scanned the page, desperate to find some kind of mistake, some loophole. But it was all there. Clear as day. Everything was mine. Camille's face went pale. She turned to me, her expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. You manipulated him, she accused, her voice shrill. You must have. There's no way Grandpa would do this to me. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice calm. Check the last line. Her eyes flicked back to the document, scanning the page. And then, I saw it. The exact moment the reality hit her. Because at the bottom of the will, Grandpa had left one final message. To my granddaughter, Camille Beaumont. I leave you the same amount of respect and care that you have shown me in my final years. Nothing. She got nothing. Camille let out a strangled noise, somewhere between a gasp and a scream. Her hands shook as she clutched the paper. No, she whispered. No. This isn't happening. She whipped around to face me, eyes blazing. You knew about this, didn't you? She hissed. I shrugged. Grandpa made his own decisions. She shoved the will toward Mr. Alden. This has to be a mistake. A typo. Something. The lawyer gave her a measured look. I can assure you, Ms. Beaumont, this is the official and legally binding will of Henry Beaumont. Camille's breathing turned ragged. She turned to our mother, desperate. Mom, do something. Mom's face was twisted in anger. But not at Camille. At me. This isn't fair, she snapped. Joel, you can't honestly think you deserve all of this. I laughed, shaking my head. Are you serious? Camille was their favorite. She always had been. They let her get away with everything, bailed her out every time she screwed up. But Grandpa saw her for what she was. And now, for the first time in her life, she was facing the consequences. Camille shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This isn't over, she spat, her voice shaking. I'll fight this. I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. Good luck with that. Because the will was final. And Camille? She had finally lost. Camille stormed out of the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like geanshits. The door slammed behind her, rattling the windows. A few murmurs spread through the room, but no one was really surprised. Everyone knew Camille's temper, her entitlement, her belief that the world owed her something just for existing. Mom was still glaring at me, her lips pressed into a tight, disapproving line. This isn't right, Joel, she said, her voice low but filled with anger. You know how hard Camille worked. I let out a sharp laugh, cutting her off. Worked? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. At what exactly? Spending Grandpa's money? Ignoring his calls? Posting fake family appreciation photos while never actually visiting him? Mom's face darkened. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. I shot back. Grandpa saw through her. He knew what kind of person she was, and he made his decision. That's not my fault. Dad, who had been silent up until now, let out a heavy sigh. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, like the weight of the situation was pressing down on his shoulders. Look, he said, rubbing his temple. Maybe we should all just take a moment to calm down. Mom ignored him, crossing her arms. You should at least give her something, Joel. She's your sister. I felt a cold rush of anger flood through me. Of course that's where this was going. Not a single word about Grandpa's wishes. Not a single word about how Camille had treated him like an ATM instead of a person. No, it was all about making sure Camille got what she wanted. Because that's how it had always been. I'm not giving her a damn thing, I said, my voice flat. Mom's eyes widened in shock, like she couldn't believe I was actually standing my ground. She's going to hate you for this, she warned. I met her gaze without flinching. She already does. The rest of the family meeting was awkward as HLL. People tried to make small talk, but the tension was so thick it was pointless. Camille had left, but her anger still lingered in the air like a storm cloud. I caught snippets of hushed conversations. She's not going to take this well. Maybe she'll contest the will. She won't win. Grandpa was too smart for that. I wanted to believe that last part. But knowing Camille, she wouldn't go down without a fight. Sure enough, it took less than 24 hours for her to make her next move. I was at home, still processing everything that had happened, when my phone started blowing up. Missed calls, angry texts, and then a notification from my bank. I frowned, opening the email. And when I saw what it said, my stomach dropped. It was an alert about an attempted withdrawal. A massive attempted withdrawal. From Grandpa's account. My hands tightened around my phone as I read the message again, making sure I wasn't imagining things. This is an automated alert regarding a transaction attempt exceeding the authorized withdrawal limit. If this was not you, please contact your bank immediately. I didn't even have to think about it. I already knew who was behind it. Camille. Somehow, she had gotten access to one of Grandpa's old accounts and tried to take out as much money as she could before the bank flagged it. I grabbed my phone and called her. She answered on the third ring, her voice casual, like she wasn't currently committing fraud. What do you want? She snapped. Are you serious, Camille? I said, my voice tight with barely contained anger. You really thought you could just steal the money? There was a beat of silence. Then she let out a cold laugh. Oh, please, Joel, she said, her voice dripping with arrogance. That money should have been mine in the first place. If Grandpa wasn't such a bitter old man, I saw red. Shut up, I snapped. Just shut up. You don't get to talk about him like that. She scoffed. Oh, come on. Don't act like he was some saint. He was spiteful. That's the only reason he gave everything to you instead of me. I gritted my teeth. No, Camille. He gave it to me because he actually trusted me. She went silent for a second, then muttered, whatever. It doesn't matter. It does matter, I shot back. Because I'm reporting this. That got her attention. Her voice turned sharp. You wouldn't dare. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Try me. There was a long pause. Then, finally, she spoke. Fine, she hissed. You want a war? You got one. And then she hung up. I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. I had no doubt in my mind. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I should have known Camille wouldn't stop at just throwing a tantrum. She was humiliated in front of the entire family. And if there was one thing Camille hated more than losing, it was looking weak. The attempted bank withdrawal was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of text messages from family members, some demanding to know why I was being so spiteful toward Camille, others warning me that she was planning to contest the will. And sure enough, an hour later, I got an email from a law firm. Camille was suing me. Her claim was ridiculous. She accused me of coercing Grandpa into changing his will, saying I had manipulated him in his final years while she was busy with her career, which, for the record, consisted of failed business ventures and Instagram sponsorships for weight loss teas. She even dragged my parents into it. Mom, of course, backed Camille completely. She gave a statement about how Camille had always been Grandpa's favorite and that it was suspicious that I suddenly inherited everything. Dad, to his credit, stayed out of it. He knew the truth but didn't want to get involved. Typical. The lawsuit was weak, but it was still a problem. It meant legal fees, wasted time, and unnecessary stress. And that's exactly what Camille wanted. She knew she wouldn't win. She just wanted to make my life HLL. Luckily for me, Grandpa had been meticulous with his estate planning. His lawyer, Mr. Alden, was a seasoned professional who had seen every inheritance dispute imaginable. He assured me that Camille's case was laughable at best. Still, I didn't want to just win the case. I wanted Camille to finally understand that actions have consequences. So, I started planning. The first step was exposing Camille's attempted theft. I had already reported the unauthorized withdrawal attempt to the bank, and after a little pressure, they agreed to provide documentation of the transaction attempt. I also had security footage from the bank showing Camille trying to access the account. And to top it all off, Grandpa's lawyer had emails from Camille, sent in the weeks before his death, where she begged for money, insulted him when he refused, and then ghosted him. These weren't just embarrassing. They were damning. And they proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Camille hadn't cared about Grandpa, only his money. When Camille's lawyer received the evidence, the case crumbled. She had no proof that I had coerced Grandpa. No witnesses, no documents, just her word and my mother's biased opinion. On the other hand, I had hard evidence of her trying to steal money, her neglect of Grandpa, and her history of financial irresponsibility. The judge dismissed her lawsuit in record time. But I wasn't done yet, because now I had leverage. I had every legal right to press charges for attempted fraud and unauthorized access to Grandpa's accounts. Camille knew it. Her lawyer knew it. And when I made it clear that I was willing to take this to court, Camille finally backed down. She dropped everything. No lawsuit, no inheritance, no more demands. And as part of the settlement, she had to publicly apologize to me in front of the family. She hated every second of it. Her face burned with humiliation as she mumbled a half-assed apology, avoiding eye contact. But she knew she had no choice. Because for the first time in her life, she had lost. The fallout was interesting. Mom still resents me for not helping Camille. She refuses to acknowledge that Camille brought this on herself. Dad keeps his distance, probably embarrassed by the whole ordeal. Most of the extended family, though, they saw Camille for who she really was. She burned every bridge with this stunt. The aunts and uncles who once doted on her stopped answering her calls. Her friends distanced themselves when the money dried up. And Camille? She had to start over. No inheritance. No financial cushion. No family willing to bail her out. She moved to a smaller apartment, sold off her luxury items, and, last I heard, was actually working a real job for the first time in her life. She still blames me, of course. She'll never admit she did this to herself. But honestly, that's not my problem. Because for the first time in my life, I'm free. Free from the constant favoritism. Free from being the spare child. Free to build my life without Camille's shadow looming over me. And I think that's exactly what Grandpa wanted. The real inheritance he left me? Peace. And that's worth more than all the money in the world. A few months passed. Camille kept her distance, which was a miracle in itself. No late-night phone calls demanding help, no guilt-tripping texts, no dramatic social media posts painting herself as the wronged sister. Just silence. And honestly, it was refreshing. I focused on my work, made smart investments with Grandpa's inheritance, and started putting together plans to expand his business. Keeping his legacy alive felt right. He had worked so hard to build something from nothing, and now I had the chance to honor that. Of course, my parents still weren't happy. Mom never forgave me for taking everything from Camille. She saw my decision as cruel, no matter how much evidence I had that Camille didn't deserve a single cent. She still called occasionally, but the conversations were short and cold. Dad, he mostly stayed neutral, but I could tell he didn't know how to handle the rift in the family. He was the type to avoid conflict, and this situation had more than enough to make him uncomfortable. And Camille? Well, I ran into her once. It was at a coffee shop, of all places. I had just ordered when I heard a familiar, strained voice at the register. I Actually, can you make that a small one instead? I turned my head. Camille stood there, digging through her purse, counting crumpled dollar bills. She looked different, her expensive clothes replaced by something more modest, her nails unpolished, her usual smugness replaced with something that almost looked like humility. She hadn't seen me yet. For a moment, I considered walking away, pretending I hadn't noticed her. But something made me pause. I stepped forward, clearing my throat. Need a few bucks? Her whole body stiffened. Slowly, she turned to face me. The look in her eyes wasn't anger. It wasn't bitter. It was a shame. I don't need your money, she muttered, her gaze dropping to the floor. I nodded, slipping my hands into my pockets. Good. Then I guess you finally learned something. She flinched, just slightly. The barista handed her the coffee, and she took it without another word. As she turned to leave, she hesitated. For a second, I thought she might apologize. Maybe even thank me, in some roundabout way, for forcing her to stand on her own 2 feet. But Camille was still Camille. Instead, she let out a small, humorless laugh and said, "You really think you won, don't you?" I didn't take the bait. I just smiled. "No, Camille," I said. "I think Grandpa won." She didn't have a comeback for that. She just nodded once, then walked away. And as I watched her disappear down the street, I felt something lift off my shoulders, something heavy I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The past, the resentment, the years of feeling like I was always in her shadow. It was gone. Because at the end of the day, Camille had lost the one thing she valued most, her control over people. And me? I had gained everything that truly mattered. Not just Grandpa's inheritance, but my freedom. And that, more than anything, was the best revenge of all.